Welcome back, everybody. In this episode, we're going to be talking about the devastating terrorist attack that occurred in New Orleans on New Year's Eve night. First and foremost, we want to give our condolences to the victims, their families and friends, and everybody that was involved in this horrific attack. All the first responders that are involved in this, our condolences go out to everybody. Let's jump into this and discuss what we know so far. This is a Shots Fired podcast. I'm Kyle Schobergen. To my right is Mark Redlich.
What we know right now is January 1st, 2025, at about 3:15 a.m., a white Ford F-150 truck being driven by a 42-year-old suspect drove through barricades, through a crowd of people, injuring more than 30 people, killing more than 10, and engaging in gunfire with multiple officers, ultimately injuring 2 officers, and that suspect was killed. In this episode, we're going to be talking about a little bit of information about New Orleans, what it takes to plan a large event similar to this one, what we know, some specific details about this incident, and then how to manage a mass casualty incident, and then what it takes to investigate a scene this big. Kyle, let's get into this.
Well, in terms of New Orleans, you have 2 major events going on at the same time. It's New Year's Eve in New Orleans, which is one of the major, largest tourist attractions there is down on Bourbon Street. Then you have the Sugar Bowl, which is occurring on New Year's Day. So you have a lot of different resources deployed out to the Sugar Bowl, and you have a lot of different resources deployed out on downtown New Orleans on Bourbon Street, managing New Year's Eve night, which you know is going to be crowded. So there's a lot going on in New Orleans on this particular night, which, I mean, it's just, it was the perfect night to, plan this type of attack. This person knew that it was going to be a weak point, and there's a lot of people down there. It's an easy target.
Yeah. Bourbon Street draws a lot of people, and oftentimes they close a lot of the streets. And what I think is really interesting about this, and we've read this already, and information is continuously coming in. It's constantly changing. But what we know is that because the Super Bowl on February 9th is being held there's barricades that have been put in place since 2017, but those barricades, some of them have actually been removed because they're in the process of putting in more permanent, more aesthetic looking barricades. But let's talk about what it takes to plan a major event like this. It happens annually, so my assumption is that New Orleans Police Department has got this dialed, and this was just one of those weak points. But Let's talk about what it takes from a major event to put together. Working in Sacramento, working major events that are held annually, there's a lot of different perspectives. You have the law enforcement side, but you also have the first responder or the fire department side. So briefly on the fire side, you're going to have medics staged, large amount of personnel. There's many times you have medics that are on foot or staged in certain locations or in certain buildings. In the event that someone is just simply injured, they fall down, maybe they twist their ankle, or they become too intoxicated to care for themselves, they have small deployment teams that can go out and manage that person and take them away to the hospital where they're needed. But then in the event of a larger scaled event like this, a mass casualty, you have those resources in place. Multiple ambulances are generally staged, or buses that have been turned into portable hospitals.
Do you think that all of that stuff was put in place for New Year's Eve night?
Yeah, I think
because I know I'm not saying it's not a planned event, but I mean, I could see that for like the Sugar Bowl or the Mardi Gras parade or whatever. I'm just curious, like New Year's Eve night, do you think that all of that stuff is already?
I think it is for this because, like you said, there's 2 major events: the Sugar Bowl, which is going to draw tens of thousands of people, and that's going to get drawn down into New Orleans on the Bourbon Street, and then you have the patrons that want to go to Bourbon Street to celebrate New Year's. So I'm confident these resources are in place because most cities that have large events have the medical side put into place and then the law enforcement side. And then the law enforcement side, we've talked about it on some of our other episodes. You have the uniformed presence, which is a deterrent, but they're also there to maintain and to watch and to keep order. But then you also have officers that are in an undercover capacity or intel gathering. They dress, you would never know who they are. Mm-hmm. They have radios and they're radioing information. They're going around keeping eyes on certain groups, different people, or they're staged in certain areas. Then you have the SWAT teams that are deployed and they're staged in specific locations around for quick responses. They also have SWAT operators staged in higher points for overwatch. most of the times in incidents like this, you have surveillance cameras that have been put up, which goes to like a basically like a real-time crime center where you have staffed location or staffed personnel in basically a room with monitors monitoring what's happening. And then you would have drones flying overhead, and depends on the incident and the time, you may have actual air support going over and monitoring, taking pictures and observing crowds that are coming and going.
And it's wild because of everything that you just talked about. That is a ton of resources, and things like this still happen.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the barricade situation real quick. I don't want to gloss over that because that's obviously the chatter of why did they not have some type of K-rail or concrete barriers to prevent a vehicle from being able to even drive in there. And you had said earlier, right, that they did actually have that stuff put in place, but then they recently took it down because they were upgrading it, or?
Yeah, they're in the process of rebuilding those areas aesthetically to host the Super Bowl, which is in a month and a half or a little over a month.
So that stuff the permanent stuff was taken down to upgrade it, and then this occurs.
Yeah, but there is kind of conflicting reports that we've seen where the suspect drove through barricades and then around barricades. But depends on, you would have inner and outer perimeters, and it gets tighter as you get down to the middle. So it's hard to tell if he drove around a temporary barrier or a permanent barrier. But large scale events like this, you're going to, in most locations, should have barriers to prevent vehicles from coming in. Incidents like this.
Well, what's crazy is you see attacks like this happening in other countries. We typically don't see people driving vehicles into crowds in America. That's just not something that we typically see, right? Usually it's some type of gun violence. And now you're starting to see more and more of this stuff. And with people idolizing these terrorist groups, which is what we see overseas and how they're conducting their terrorist attacks, it is sad that we are now in a place in America where these major cities, or where they conduct or they have major tourist attractions, we have to put up concrete barriers now to prevent vehicles from now plowing into people during crowded events.
Yeah,
that's sad.
There's other forms of barricades. You can use dump trucks. City resources have dump trucks, and oftentimes they actually fill them with gravel or even sand, because they use that not only for a vehicle barricade, but also in the event of like an active shooter. It would stop bullets going through the sand. You can also use patrol vehicles to actually prevent that, and then those portable K-rails. But considering barricades, you can't just put up solid barricades around an entire perimeter, because if there is a mass casualty,
you got to be able to get in and out.
You have to get resources in. That's where having mobile ones, they even make the ones that drop down into the ground with a key, or they come up, or even having patrol vehicles. I've worked at intersections of large major events where you use your patrol car to block the intersection in the event you have to move and let resources in and out.
Yeah, I mean, even if you use cars, if you had to, you could easily move those things in and out if you needed to. But even a vehicle would stop or drastically slow down a moving vehicle should it collide into. So this guy plows through the barricades or goes around, and it's 3:15 in the morning. It's Bourbon Street. I've never been down there before, but in talking to some buddies that live there, it's like Vegas. It's like the Vegas Strip. People are down there all night long, and on New Year's Eve, and the day of the Sugar Bowl, everyone's going to be down there. So multiple people get hit by this truck, and being in law enforcement, I've been to several car accidents where vehicles hit pedestrians, and it's not a pretty sight. People get really mangled up, and when you're a first responder and you see stuff like that, or just someone that's attending New Year's Eve and they witness things like that, it's gruesome. And I've already seen photos surfacing online of what some of these victims look like after being hit by the truck, and it's carnage. I mean, it's bad. And so as soon as the truck plows into the crowd of the people, you can see like groups of cops immediately running towards the scene of where this happened. And it's like, I don't know, I'm trying to put myself down there. If I was down there and you saw that, like, are you assuming that this is a terrorist attack or someone trying to kill a bunch of people? Or are you just thinking, holy crap, maybe this is a drunk driver that just plowed into a bunch of people, right? You don't know. And as they run up, this guy opens fire on police officers, striking two of them and shooting two cops. And then officers engage back and shoot and kill this guy. When they pull him out of the truck, he's wearing a tactical vest, BDU style pants. Clearly, he's armed himself for this. He had a long gun and a handgun, improvised explosive devices, IEDs in the truck, correct?
Yep.
This was obviously a well-planned out attack on this guy's behalf. And the reports are saying, and you can see in the photos, that he had some type of flag hanging from the back of his truck, which they're saying could have been tied to ISIS or some other type of foreign terrorist group. I'm trying to put myself in the shoes of a cop. You're now down there. It's absolute chaos. Things like that, you're probably starting to register like this is not some drunk driver, clearly. And having to piece all that together and know what you're dealing with, and then now you're having to manage this extremely large-scale scene, that is no easy task, and deal with all your victims, everybody that's down there.
I'm trying to put myself in that perspective too, in that situation. I think I think most are going to respond to sounds or movement of people. And there may have been some officers that saw the truck, but there's going to be officers that didn't see the truck and they're responding to people running, screaming. You're naturally going to go that way as an officer to see what's happening. And then to get fired upon and then engage that, like, it almost makes me wonder if this person planned on driving through, or if he saw that, like if he planned based on having the tactical gear, maybe he was going to slide in, have the IEDs, maybe he was going to make his way on foot into the crowd, but he saw this weak point of the barricades and decided to change his course of action. I don't know, but it seems like he was kind of prepared for.
I think he had more planned, and I think the cops did a freaking outstanding job engaging this guy and dealing with that threat before he could carry out any more attacks. But yeah, he's got IEDs in the vehicle. He's wearing a tactical vest. He's brought a rifle. He's got a gun. I think he clearly had more plans of attacking people, probably getting out, maybe shooting people, is what I would guess. But props to the officers that responded to that and put an end to that as quickly as they did, because that could have been a whole lot worse.
Yeah, in trying to manage that, the primary mission of an officer responding to something like that is to stop the threat, which means you're going to have officers running past injured people, seeing that on the ground. And as hard as it is to say, is that you have to pass those people, even though they're asking for help, or you see that they need help. You have to continue past that to stop the threat so it doesn't continue more death or more injuries. Then you have to work backwards. And that's where, like, the mass casualty training, how to manage a scene like that. You have chaos, you have people running, screaming, you have people trying to help people. It just compounds, and that's where total scene management comes in, of stop and not having, and we talk about it a lot in our classes, not having independent action at that point. You need someone to take over that scene, the command post, and to start managing that. And that's really complex with a scene this big. I mean, you had over 30 injured people, 10 have been killed, and then you have 2 cops that have been shot. Like, this is
plus this guy's got IEDs in the truck. That's a major problem in and of itself, because now you're talking about evacuating all those buildings around. There's people up on balconies. I mean, there's hotels everywhere.
But you're causing even more chaos, not just on the ground. Now you have people hearing gunshots, seeing this. They're running. I mean, I would be running if I was not in a uniform. They're running. Some are probably going to businesses, which is overflowing businesses, which is causing chaos in businesses. People inside don't know what's happening. I mean,
there's just so much more outside of what you see at face value if something like that happens. I mean, there's just so much to do. So they end up identifying this guy, and they're saying he's tied to some terrorist organizations, and they classified this as a terrorist attack pretty early on. They've determined now that this guy's a U.S. citizen, and so now they're trying to figure out, is this a domestic terrorist attack or is this a foreign terrorist attack? Either way, part of the investigation of what they're going to do to this guy, or do with the information from him, is they're going to backtrack everywhere this guy was prior to leading up to coming into New Orleans. Sounds like the truck was rented out of Texas and driven there maybe a couple days prior. But one of the biggest key informations is going to be his cell phone. I mean, everything today in your life is in your phone for the most part. So they're going to dive into his phone and they're going to backtrack using cell towers. Where is he pinging? Where is he going? Where is he coming from? They're going to go to every freaking gas station, store, restaurant, anything, everywhere that guy was ever been. And they're going to obtain all that video surveillance. So when you're talking about like post investigation, you're going to have to delegate so many different groups of resources and task them with different things. I mean, this is a major deal, and there's going to be a lot of time and resources that are going to be put into this. One thing that comes to my mind similar to this was the Boston bombing. And in that case, those two suspects were outstanding, and they had to go track them down and find them. But I absolutely think he did not act alone. I personally think that there's other people involved in this. They're going to find that out. And if people are wondering, hey, how'd they find out who this guy was so quick? How do they find out he's tied to these organizations? There's so many things that law enforcement has capabilities of doing, of finding information about people very quickly. Because if there are other people involved or there's other plans for further attacks, they need to be on top of that quickly.
Well, and then you combine the FBI with it. They have basically unlimited resources, but also there's citizens that are really smart, really savvy, and are really good at the internet. And it only takes a couple videos or pictures of that truck, the license plate. Maybe someone says who this person's name is, and people, I guarantee, news outlets are all digging into this person. Like, the amount of resources that are going into discovering who this person is, where he lives, is a major spiderweb, and all kinds of people. And that's why we talk about, information's constantly coming in, it's constantly changing, because there's so many different people involved. I might find a piece of information, which we dug into it today. I'm comparing it with what you found, and then yours is updated. So there's a lot of resources and a lot of information comes from this.
Yeah, and then they start finding out who's his family, where does he live. There's going to be all sorts of search warrants written. Plus, this guy had IEDs in his truck. I mean, you can't just send a SWAT team out to a house and serve a search warrant on this dude's location, because now you're talking potential explosives at his house. I mean,
well, if he's doing this, it's possible, which I would believe, and those responding officers are probably in the same mindset, is that house is booby-trapped, because he probably has the intent of knowing he's not going to survive this incident.
Yeah.
So now it's probably out of state. If he rented a truck in Texas, they say, who knows if he actually
he's
lives
from
in
Texas. He is born and raised in Texas.
So look at the resources that's going to take now, because now you have the FBI headquarters over there in Texas. Then you have the local resources all having to converge on that house. And then as soon as they get that address, they can't not do anything with it. So they have to go out, do surveillance, start evacuating people. This is a major chain of event.
Yeah, you see what you see on the mainstream media on TV, and it I'm not going to say it's a small scale what you're seeing, but people fail to, or people just don't know that the spider web that this creates and how much work actually goes into this, and manpower and hours. Speaking of which, I mean, could you imagine working an event like that and it's 3:15 in the morning? You're probably thinking things are going to wrap up. You're going to be going home soon. And then this happens. You are not going home anytime soon. I mean, these cops are going to be awake for hours. They're going to have to be interviewed. They're going to have to write their reports. I mean, their body cam footage is going to have to be combed through. You don't just get to hang it up at the end of your shift when something like this happens. I don't care how tired you are, and then go home and then come back to work. I mean, they're going to be there all day long. They've already been awake all night. Again, it's just some other things that maybe people don't think about is mentally how draining that's going to be on them. Plus everything that they had to witness and deal with, all that carnage down there. I mean, that
stuff's going to remain in place for a while too. And so I imagine there's cops that work a 10 or 12 hour night shift already that work that specific area. But with these two major events, you're calling in all the other resources for this. So you have day shift officers that are used to working day shift hours that are probably working the evening. They're already exhausted because it's out of their normal sleep cycle. And then this happens. They're not, like you said, are not going home. And there's those officers that were probably about to get off shift that are probably still on scene because they can't leave because they have 100%. Like scene security.
Yeah.
They've seen something. They're holding something.
Yeah.
And then not only that is you have the media showing up. They want information. And like you've said, they're ruthless. They want information.
Yeah.
And then you have those that have lost their lives in this. and there's family members that are calling each other, and there's those family members that have lost their lives that are not responding to texts or phone calls, which is drawing those family members down there asking questions. And having a mass casualty like that, it's possible that some of these victims haven't been identified yet. So you have family that are demanding answers. Like, I would be down there saying, where is my family? You know, was this person there? Like,
which takes extra resources to manage all of that. It takes a lot of resources just to manage media, not including all the, and you're talking a terrorist attack. I mean, every major news media outlet is going to be responding to that location if they're not already there. And so you have to deal with that. And that is no easy task. And they are ruthless. They want to get the story, and they want to get the best footage. They want to get the best video footage, pictures. And sometimes they will go to great lengths to do that. And as police, that is scene security. You can't just let people in and out of your scene. Media do have special privileges and access to certain areas, but to be able to manage that, it's difficult. It's hard enough on just your everyday call for service, maybe a critical incident that happens, you know, just dealing with the media. They're a drain. They're also a very big drain on resources, but you have to do it. You have to manage it.
Yeah, and the public wants that information as well.
It's important. Yeah. I absolutely think it's important. You have to have the media. You have to push the information out. I totally get that. I'm just saying, from a resource standpoint, from the law enforcement point, it's aggravating because you could be doing other things, but you have to manage that. Otherwise, they'll go everywhere.
Well, look, prime example is just look at the press conferences that they've had. They've had multiple press conferences. And if you look beyond the person speaking at the podium, there's like 30 people standing back there. That means most of them are representing a form of entity
agency,
that is there to help investigate. And then you see the superintendent, which is basically the chief of police, the top chief that's at that press conference. Well, that chief is also needed in other areas for briefings. So the chief gets moved around a lot. The different resources, it's like 1% of information that most understand.
We got to give a shout out to the 82-year-old
yes
female out there as the police chief of New Orleans. I didn't know that.
I didn't either. But you know what? The first press conference she gave, I liked how she talked. She's like, was very tough and aggressive, and like this. I mean, she was awesome.
Yeah. I had no idea. Anyways, it's a tragic event. I hate to think that that's where we are in America right now. And I know we've said it before, but I don't know. I mean, now we're having to be concerned about people driving their vehicles through crowds and bringing these terrorist organizations, you know, to America. It's pretty frightening. And when you're in law enforcement and you work in big cities and these big events, that stuff has to be going through your mind for 24 hours.
Which is interesting because we're in the middle of recording this and more information is coming in. But resources that go in just to that, not only do you have the local sheriff's office, you have police department, you have private security, you have security from that stadium, you have like code enforcement, food and beverage control, like looking at stuff like the vendors. You even have like the FAA that are monitoring that because they have to divert flights or prevent things from. There's all kinds of things going into a major event like this. So my thoughts and prayers go out to the family members that have been involved in this, that have been injured, and those that have lost their lives, and all the first responders and all those that are involved in managing a scene like this. I want to end on saying that for anybody that's going to an outdoor event or any type of situation that has potentially streets blocked off or people walking in the streets, I think it's really important to be aware of barricades. If you're just a patron walking and you see streets that are blocked off with mobile barricades that any vehicle could drive through, I think you just need to be aware of that and keep your head on a swivel. And if you're a law enforcement officer working these situations and you are responsible for that, or if you notice a gap, you need to speak up, get patrol cars there, and block these roads to prevent incidents like this. So my hearts go out to everyone involved. Please be safe out there.
Yeah, here's a quick question that I'll end on, you know, because I was rattling this through my brain. If you're an officer and you're working an event like this, you see a vehicle driving at a high rate of speed towards the event with this guy had a flag hanging from the back. I don't know that you could see that, but let's just say you could. Let's say you could see this flag that you recognize to be a terrorist group flag. What are you doing? You don't have to answer it.
That's a hard one.
Because that takes some time to think about. But in America, here we are. This is happening. As a cop, if you're working these events and you see something like this occurring, or a vehicle traveling at a high rate of speed now with some type of flag like that hanging from it, these are conversations that you should be having with yourself about what are you going to do? Are you going to take action and shoot that driver, or are you going to wait for something to happen and then take action? And if you do decide to take action beforehand, can you articulate that for using deadly force? And I know that's that was a random question, but I was thinking about it, and it's like, I've never been trained on that. In my whole career in law enforcement, 19 years, I've never been trained on that. Hell, we don't even ever really, I don't think I've ever even talked about it. It didn't happen, but it's happening now. So in law enforcement, I think you need to ask yourself that, and I think you need to have an honest discussion with yourself. If you are working in a large city, or I don't even care if it's a large city, some type of event.
Yeah, any event.
And you see something like that, you need to ask yourself, what are you willing to do? And what are you going to do?
That's a great question. Even if, with or without a flag, a vehicle traveling at a high rate of speed towards a group of people.
Yeah.
Can you articulate that?
That's where we are right now.
That's a great question.
So think about that. We could sit here. I mean, there's going to be so much information. By the time this gets released, there's already going to be new information. There's press briefings going on constantly, probably every hour or two. And with every press briefing, we know that there's going to be new information. And look, here's the thing. For those of you watching who are not in law enforcement, there is going to be information that is not going to be released. You are not going to hear everything that they know right now. And trust me when I say they know a lot more than they're willing to release. And that is done strategically to protect the case and not provide details that they don't want to be released. So you may be hearing stuff on the media, and you may be asking a lot of questions, or why aren't they releasing more information, or why do they not have the answers already to this? Odds are they probably already do, and they're not going to release it for the integrity of the case.
Yep, that's a good point to put out. All right, everybody. Well, thanks. Stay safe and be smart.
See you guys.